Ropes, lines, and small stuff. If your goal is to find your boat where you left it, you're going to want to get this line stuff wired tight. Before we get too far into the weeds here, I've got a trivia question for you. What's the difference between rope and line? Rope is unemployed, lines have jobs. When you go to your favorite marine supply place and you go in the back and you see all the reels of rope, you grab the end, you measure off 40 foot, you cut it, you splice it, you whip it, and you give it a job. It becomes a mooring line or a tow line or an anchor line. Lines have jobs, ropes are unemployed, like a couple of my relatives. All right, so let's get into this whole line thing here. You got two different types. You've got natural fiber and you've got synthetic. So let's do the natural fiber first. This is your manillas, your hemp, your jute, your sessile, cotton. And these things all started out, they were a plant. And they take the fibers and they make line out of it. But it started out as a plant. My recommendation, and you do you, is there's no place on a recreational boat for natural fiber line. Why? For the big reason is it rots. You can't put it away wet. If you do, it's going to get mildew and mold, and it wants to return to compost. So I can't really see a good reason to have one on a recreational boat. You may have a good reason. When I was in the Coast Guard, we used natural fiber to control chain paying out on the buoy tender. We counted on the fiber breaking. But I don't know on the recreational side why you'd want to do that. Even if Uncle Bob gave you 300 foot of it, I just don't see it. Okay, so now what's the other side? This is your synthetics. These are man-made items, and there is a ton of them. You've got on the poly side, polypropylene, polyester, polycombo. You've got Kevlar, nylon, Dacron. There's just a ton of them. And then you get into the construction. You got single braid, double braid, diamond braid, plated, twisted, hollow, 3-strand. There's a lot there. I follow the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. There's 2 lines that you want to use: double braided nylon and 3-strand nylon. Why? Well, they're extremely plentiful. I've seen these things for sale in hardware stores. You can find them anywhere, and the cost factor is reasonable. Another reason is the stretch factor. You can count on, they're well documented, so you can count on what the stretch factor is going to be on these 2 types of line. Now, there are some applications. I know some of these sailboats, they don't want their line to stretch, and then they're going to go after the Kevlars or something like that. But we're talking about beginning boat operators. We're talking about recreation, and these are my recommendations. If you have something going on, by all means, you do you, okay? Why else? Color. You can find these lines in a bunch of different colors, and this summer we had a sailboat tie up away from us, and I noticed that they had different colored lines running all over the boat. And so I investigated, and I talked to the husband and wife team that were on there, and it was genius. They had different lines running to different parts of the sails. I don't really know a whole lot about sailboats, but I thought to myself, wow, they can just look at what line they need to do work on, either tighten it up or let it out, and boom, they could tell by the color. And then if they were going to teach me, if I want to learn how to sail one of these days, that was genius. Tighten up that red line, tighten up that blue line. It was, I really liked it. So what else? Double braided nylon. It's soft, it's pliable, and it's extremely strong, and I recommend that these be your mooring lines. You want your mooring lines in double braided nylon. And I recommend that you have 4. I also recommend that you figure out what your tide range is and try and make the length of your lines so that you can utilize that well-documented stretch factor. If you've ever watched Qualified Captain and seen somebody's boat hanging off of a dock, hanging off of a pylon because they didn't factor in the stretch and the tide goes out and now they're hanging off all their mooring lines, that's what I'm talking about. So there's another thing to consider. Size is very important on your mooring lines depending on the size of your cleats. I've seen a lot of smaller boats have way too big a line and you can't get a good round turn on the cleat. You can't make it off properly, and that becomes a real problem. Or I've seen people use too small a line and the line will just pull off the cleat. It's really hard to get it to not do that. So how do you know that you have the right size line on? Well, your owner's manual, I'd confer with that and see what they recommend. If you don't have an owner's manual, I would take a look at some of these marine supply places. Usually they have a fairly robust section on their website with regard to lines, and their recommendations aren't too far off. There is another rule, and take this with a grain of salt. For every 1 inch of cleat, you want a 1/16 diameter increase. That's not real far off. I think you hit the top of the bell curve and start sliding off when the cleats get a little bit larger. So let's talk about the safe stretch, and I'm not talking about parting stretch. Parting, depending on what manual you look in, is usually around 27%. Safe stretch, a good number for you to calculate your tide is 10%. So for every 10 foot of line you put out, you get 1 foot of safe stretch. That's not bad. And again, now you can calculate that tide. You add that in, life is good. Now let me end this with saying that lines are a perishable item. You're going to have to replace them sooner or later. You can do things like put them in a bucket of fresh water with a mild detergent or some salt away, and get that salt out so it doesn't get real stiff. But at the end of the day, sooner or later you're going to have to replace them. So factor that in on your budget. Make sure that you know that these are some of the things that you're going to have to do. So the next video I'm going to do is we're going to actually take these lines that we've just talked about and we're going to secure them to a deck fitting. Single bit, double bit, cleats. We'll start with the less controversial and we'll end with the more controversial, which is the cleat. And I think you'll enjoy it. I always appreciate you guys stopping by. Thank you so much. I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.